I think this is an important question, and this is not something I kind of pre-recorded or pre-planned or anything. I just thought about it, and I thought it'd be interesting to have my thoughts on it, kind of recorded of sorts. Is education worth it? Is specifically is university education worth it? College education? I think it's very, it's obviously a very complicated answer that not many people have full understanding of it, even from a very young age. And I think it's very hard because when you're young, for example, um, the way the young perceive school is that it is an ought, right? It is a necessary. It's necessary for survival. If I don't do well in one facet of my educational life, that may result in a failure to be a successful adult. That is the way sometimes it is perceived as a child, especially when you think of grades and you think of a lot of high schools are very focused on university. It seems like for the most part, life as a child is an ascent for the preparation for getting into a college, because they say the way we are, they guess they scare kids. They say you have to get into a good college or else you won't be successful. You won't have a good life. And that puts a lot of pressure on kids, and it loses the focus on what perhaps other people, they think of school as some way to learn about oneself or learn about the world. Perhaps there's an aspect of knowledge acquisition and learning, and there's another way of looking at it as like a stepping stone towards college education. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You obviously want to acquire lots of knowledge to some degree and so that you can add on it when you get into university and whatever field you may end up in. But I think it's just problematic because the way we conceive of university, at least for many people I know, university is, it's like a stepping stone towards self-sustenance, right? So the schooling becomes a means towards an ends of making money, getting a job. And what that does is that it makes the learning part of it makes the experience of different ways of thinking, the experience of meeting different kinds of people, the experience of living outside one's own bubble, it makes those things, subservient to the ends, which is I need to get a good job so I can pay for my rent. Now, so the question is, if you look at it in that sense, and many people look at it in that sense, you think of college as a way to acquire you a job. It's unfortunately not very true, because many people who graduated from college, and many people I know specifically, close friends of mine, they have a hard time getting jobs because a college is not something that will necessarily. It's just the thing that is kind of the thing it purports itself to be when it's being sold as this expensive investment is just not what it is in actuality, because and many reasons for that. Partly it's because of technology, partly it's because of the rise of technology. It's a rise of different fields of interest in different field sectors are changing, and it's just not very realistic to think that whatever you want to be will have. So there'll be someone out there who has money who wants to pay you to do what you want to do. In all cases, perhaps in some cases that is true, but the presupposition that school will land you a high-paying job in the same field that you studied, and in the same specified field that you studied, you'll get exactly the kind of job that will add on to the knowledge that you acquired during those 4 years or 5 or 6, no matter it depends on what kind of school you went to, or 3. It is just not a very good presupposition. If you think of college as a way, if you think of the investment in college as a way to make more money in the future, I don't think it's I don't think it's worth it in that sense. But that's not necessarily how I think of college, or at least how I approach college or university, or how I think it ought to be approached. I think that obviously it differs from person to person, but for me, I very much in my university experience at an American college where I was immersed in a liberal education, liberal not necessarily in the sense of being left-leaning, but in the sense of being, it's a different term, you look it up, but it's the idea of being exposed to different kinds of thinking, different kinds of points of view. It's to immerse yourself in history of different things. In my school, for example, we were required to take these core curriculum classes, these core classes where we were immersed in what would perhaps be considered some of the great thinkers of human civilization. You know, I was reading, in some classes I was reading Virgil. We read the Aeneid, for everything from the Aeneid to, you know, Thoreau's Walden, and I took those things as very, and I took those classes very seriously, not because I was thinking of getting high grades, but because I was genuinely fascinated by the material. These, you know, it was going beyond the amount of knowledge that I was even aware of or was exposed to growing up in high school or elementary. I think when you're studying in elementary and high school, you don't really think about the further past, and I just had this amazing experience to really engage with a lot of very fascinating things and topics. Like I took this in that same class, for example, so the class was about utopias and dystopias, and we were kind of engaging it through literature. So we read the book, I forgot, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, by Philip K. Dick, the book that is, that turns into Blade Runner. We watched Blade Runner as well, and we were comparing it to, the Aeneid and to Walden. And we were reading all these sorts of texts from ancient Greece and all these different places. And these were all required classes, so this is not the same class. This class in particular was not a required class, but there's like a level where there's an area of class that you have to take a class from this kind of group of classes, and they all engage with classic texts. And I thought those classes I found very fascinating. I learned a lot about myself and about society and about how structurally foundational things are. And one of our requirements, for example, we had a humanities requirement, and I took this class called social and cultural analysis. And this is something that it was under a field called social and cultural analysis. It's kind of connected to sociology, but it was a field of study that I had absolutely no clue about going in, and I didn't know anything about it. I was not exposed to these kinds of thinking when I was in high school or, any time before that. I never really engaged with them before, but they were, a lot of it was continental philosophy from the early 20th century. So we were reading stuff from Adorno and Horkheimer. We were reading some earlier stuff from the 19th century. We were learning. I wish I had the syllabus out with me, but we were reading all that stuff. We read. It was like every week we would focus on a specific topic, such as, for example, race or sex, or class, and then every week we would have like a bunch of readings. It was a very reading heavy class, and we would learn about how to engage with a topic from different lenses or different points of view. For example, in the studies of sex, we were reading both Simone de Beauvoir, with she wrote The Second Sex, and we were also reading stuff like Judith Butler's thoughts on gender performativity, as well as the intersectionality of, so a lot. I guess you could also argue a lot of these were more left leaning, and you can argue that the academic sphere in general is very left leaning, and the social science fields are kind of single minded. But in my perspective, I came from a place where I didn't even know those existed. So, I was able to get exposed to many things from those fields. I took economics classes as well, and I was learning about classical economics. I was learning about the difference between, Keynesian economics versus classical economics. I had an opportunity to take classes from so many different fields. I studied, I took a game design class, games class, where I learned about the history of video games, the history of gaming in general, from different genres, from different points of view, from different philosophical point of view. I sat in some free classes. I sat into class of philosophy, where I learned more about Descartes, for example, and his studies on the nature of what is real. I think Therefore I Am is very often quoted, but I don't think many people actually engaged and read his meditations. So in those senses, these were things that I would never have been able to. I guess I probably would have been able to learn about them online, because these, all the information is free now because of the Wikipedia and the proliferation of knowledge. But if you kind of have if you feel that learning about yourself and about society and about things around you and meeting different kinds of people, if you put some value in that, I think I found my educational experience very positive in those experiences, in the sense of learning, in the sense of becoming, I think, a more well-rounded human being. I'm very lucky to feel this way, because I feel like not many people who come out of college feel that they've learned much. But for me personally, through the different classes I took, from whether it was, reading about the architecture of Christopher Wren in the UK, or learning about, cinema, film theory, or like whatever it was, or just learning about the CRISPR-Cas9. And I took a genetics class. We learned about CRISPR-Cas9 and how it was working, and we had to understand the mechanisms behind it. Learning about so many different kinds of things. I feel like my educational, whatever I felt like was important for education, I feel like I got it out of it. And this is not to say anything about, this is irrespective of grades, irrespective of what of the outcomes of getting a specific kind of job afterwards. These things I found were secondary, and I think what was more important for me was to learn more about myself, and learn about my society, and learn about the past and history. And up to this day, I feel like I'm still in that process of learning, where college education for me was like, it kickstarted my interest in all these things. And right now, and I feel like in the afterglow of education, I'm still trying to learn as much as I can. I'm reading more than I ever have when I was in school, because I was very busy back then. So yeah, I think that education is worth it if you. It depends on what you think, what you were trying to get out of education, right? And how you approach it while you're within the system of it. It is problematic that for the United States, for example, education was really going to set you back years in debt. That is awful. And I think that when you consider the reality of things and the fact that you do have to eventually pay back the debt, it probably, it's hard to tell from now. I just graduated. It's hard to tell whether or not the negatives of acquiring a lot of debt that you now have to figure out, using the education you got, using the degree that you got, you had to figure out a way to pay for the debt if you did if you did get that. But I think there are teachers who are passionate about what they do. The debt is an issue, but I think it depends on what you consider is important for you. And I think that these pieces of debt, you can pay it for decades. It's not really going to necessarily halt you from sustaining yourself in the short term or in the long term. You can manage your debt in many different ways. The fact that you have that is awful, and it's not the best of situations. But again, if you think that what you think education is for is about a specific kind of learning, and you think that the education system the system that you're in, is helping you get to those ends, then I think that I guess it's not really, you can't really answer this question. And it really depends on the person, and depends on what you want out of it, and whether or not you feel that the costs of it are worth it. For me personally, I felt that it was worth it because I felt like there is no price for me. Personally, I don't think there's a price to wisdom. There's no price for learning about yourself, learning about the world around you. Knowledge is priceless, I think, and it's something that you keep for the most part. And I feel like I'm a more well-rounded person because of my college education. And I'm really happy about that. So, long story short, I think it is worth it if you have the same kind of goals as I did. Now, again, not every school is about this specific. Maybe I was very lucky to go to a school where there were professors and systems in which that still had a premium to learning about history, about philosophy, about what it means to be here, what it means to be alive, what it means to be a happy member of society. Speaking of happy, I also took a class on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is very fascinating. But anyway, so I think if you have the opportunity to take college and it's free, or it's very low cost for you relative to how much you are willing to spend, definitely go for it. And go for it for the right reasons, not for the reasons that society kind of puts upon you. There is an issue, of course, that every college is in a very I went to a very liberal and leftist college, and maybe there's a sense of socialization towards the political agenda or political views of a particular institution. So maybe I went to a left-leaning school, a very left-leaning school, so perhaps it was a brainwash for me to be a little more left-leaning. But I think as long as you keep an open mind to all kinds of thought, you can, and as long as you're open-minded and you're willing to listen to other points of view, you can resist all this stuff. This is what I think about school and university. I don't have much else to say about it, but That's all.